uh, hours, not days, not weeks, hours. And I want to sit with that word for a second before anything else because I almost want to second guess it. Usually, when timing comes through in a reading, it has some give to it, a window, a general sense of soon. This one came through tight, specific, and when something comes through that specific, I've learned not to soften it just because it makes me a little uncomfortable to say something so precise. Virgo, so let's go with it. Hours. Let me try to understand what that actually means. Because I don't think it means a literal countdown you should be watching on your phone. I think it means something is closer than close. Already in motion in a way that doesn't have much runway left before it becomes visible. The first thing I want to address is everything changes. Because that phrase on its own can sound almost too big to be useful. Like, what does that actually mean practically for your Tuesday or your Thursday or whatever day this lands on? What I'm sensing is that the change isn't about your external circumstances shifting dramatically overnight. Your job is still your job, your home is still your home. The actual structure of your daily life the next morning is probably going to look pretty similar to how it looked the morning before. What changes is something more internal to a specific relationship, a piece of information or an admission that recontextualizes everything that's come before it. Here's an analogy that keeps coming to mind. Imagine you've been reading a story and there's been a character whose motivations have felt slightly unclear the whole way through. You've had theories, you've made some guesses, and then suddenly, late in the story, that character explains themselves. And once they do, you don't go back and reread the whole story, but something about how you understand everything that's already happened shifts. Scenes that felt ambiguous suddenly make sense. Behavior that confused you suddenly has an explanation. That's the shape of everything changes here. Not the external facts of your life, the meaning you're able to make of something that's already been happening. Um, Let me talk about the they finally open up part because I think this is where the real substance of the reading lives. There's someone, I feel like that's almost too obvious to say, but I want to say it anyway because I want to be clear that this is specific, not general. There's a particular person, and that person has been holding something back from you. Not maliciously. I want to be careful with that word because I don't think this has the texture of deception in a harmful sense. I think it has the texture of someone who's been scared, scared of how something would land if they said it, scared of what it would mean about them or about the relationship once it was said out loud rather than just felt privately. And I think something is about to shift in their relationship to that fear. Not because the fear disappears entirely, fear like that rarely vanishes completely right before someone acts despite it, but because something tips the balance. The discomfort of continuing to hold this becomes finally greater than the discomfort of saying it. I keep getting this image of someone standing at the edge of something, looking down, and for a long time just standing there looking, feeling the vertigo of it, and then almost without a final dramatic decision, just stepping off. Not because they became fearless, because staying still finally became harder than moving. Has there been a sense recently of this person being a little more present than usual, a little more like they're working themselves up to something? Even if you couldn't name what, tell me in the comments because I think some of you have already been feeling the edges of this, even without being able to put your finger on it. I want to go deeper into what's actually being held back because they open up is vague enough that I want to try to give it more shape. What I'm sensing is an admission of feeling, not a confession of wrongdoing, not a dramatic secret in the sense of something scandalous, more like an honest accounting of something they feel that they haven't been saying plainly, even if it's been visible in pieces, in moments, in the way they've shown up around you without quite naming what was driving that showing up. I think there's a specific quality to how they've been managing this, a kind of careful calibration where they let just enough show to keep the connection warm, but not so much that it would require either of you to acknowledge it directly. That calibration takes energy. It's a kind of constant low-level management, deciding how much warmth is safe to show in this particular moment, whether this comment crosses a line into too revealing, whether that gesture says more than they meant it to. I think that management is becoming unsustainable. Not because anything dramatic happened to force the issue, but because maintaining that kind of careful calibration indefinitely is exhausting in a way that compounds over time. At some point, the effort of continuing to hide something becomes more taxing than the effort of finally revealing it. Let me talk about how this might actually happen in terms of the mechanics of the moment, because I think it's useful to have some sense of what to expect, even if I can't give you an exact script. What I'm picking up is that this isn't going to be a planned, formal conversation. I don't think they're going to sit you down with intention and deliver a prepared speech. I think it's more likely to happen in the middle of something else. A conversation that starts about something ordinary and then partway through shifts, a pause that goes on a beat too long, a sentence that starts in one direction and then, instead of finishing the way it was supposed to, takes an unexpected turn into something more honest. I think there's going to be a moment of visible hesitation right before it happens, like watching someone gather themselves, and then once they start, I think it comes out a little messily, not polished, not the eloquent declaration you might picture in your head when you imagine this kind of moment. More like someone speaking carefully, choosing words as they go, maybe stumbling a little because what they're saying matters more to them than almost anything they've said before. And that weight makes fluency harder, not easier. I want to prepare you for that imperfection because I think there's a risk if you're expecting something cinematic of being thrown by how human and unpolished the actual moment is. Don't let the imperfection make you doubt the significance of what's happening. The stumbling is part of what makes it real. I want to address the within hours piece a little more directly because I think there's something worth saying about why the timing is this immediate. What I'm sensing is that something specific has already shifted very recently that's bringing this to a head faster than it might have happened otherwise. I don't have perfect clarity on what that catalyst is, but I keep getting a sense of either a conversation that already happened, something said, maybe not even by you, that touched on something relevant, or a moment of realization on their end, something they noticed or felt or were confronted with that made the cost of continuing to wait suddenly feel too high. Whatever the specific trigger, I think it's already in motion, which means the window I'm describing, hours rather than days, isn't really a prediction about some far off event. It's a description of something that's already underway, even if you haven't seen the visible evidence of it yet. I'd encourage you to be a little more present than usual in the next stretch of time. Not anxiously watching for something, but just generally a little more attuned to the people around you, a little more available, a little less likely to be so absorbed in something else that you miss a moment that's trying to happen. I want to talk about what you might feel in the moment this actually happens, because I think your own reaction matters here, and I don't want to leave that unaddressed. What I'm sensing is that your first response is likely to be a kind of recognition more than surprise. Like, even though the specific timing might catch you off guard, the content of what's being said probably won't feel entirely unexpected. I think some part of you has already sensed this, has already been carrying some intuition about what's underneath this person's behavior, even if you haven't let yourself fully believe it or articulate it. If that's accurate, I think your reaction is going to have a quality of, oh, there it is, more than, wait, what? A confirmation of something you already half knew, rather than a complete reversal of your understanding. I'd encourage you, when this happens, to let that recognition be visible. Don't perform surprise. You don't actually feel in some attempt to seem appropriately reactive. If part of you already knew, let that show. I think it'll actually mean more to them in that moment to see that you'd already sensed it, that this wasn't coming entirely out of nowhere to you, than it would to see a performance of shock. I want to address something that might be sitting with you, which is a kind of pressure to respond perfectly in the moment with exactly the right words, the right reaction, the right next step. I want to release you from that pressure as much as I can through a reading like this. What I'm sensing is that this person, in opening up, isn't looking for you to have a perfectly composed response ready. They're not handing you a test you need to pass with the right answer. They're handing you something real, something they've been carrying. And what actually matters in that moment is presence, not performance. If your honest reaction is something messy, something that doesn't come out in beautifully formed sentences, that's not a failure. That's actually consistent with the whole texture of what's happening here. Two people finally being honest with each other in a moment that's significant enough to make eloquence difficult for both of you. That's not a problem to be solved. That's just what real moments often look like. I want to talk about what happens after this moment, because I think the titles Everything Changes deserves some unpacking in terms of what specifically shifts going forward. What I'm sensing is that the dynamic between you moves from something implicit to something explicit. Before this, I think there's been a lot of unspoken understanding, a lot of behavior that suggested feeling without naming it directly. After this, I think that implicit quality starts to fall away. Things that used to be left ambiguous on purpose as a kind of mutual protection start to become things you can actually talk about directly. I think this changes the texture of your interactions in a way that's subtle but significant. Conversations that used to have a careful, slightly guarded quality to them start to feel more open. Plans that used to be left vague, because making them specific would have required acknowledging something neither of you was ready to acknowledge, start to become more concrete. I don't think this means everything is immediately resolved or that you move instantly into some kind of settled, defined relationship. I think there's still a process that unfolds after this initial opening, figuring out what this actually means practically for both of you, but the foundation underneath that process changes. You're building on honesty now rather than on careful management, and that's a meaningfully different foundation to work from. I want to address something practical, which is what you should do, if anything, in the hours leading up to this, given that I'm sensing the timing is this close. I don't think there's a specific action required from you. I don't think you need to engineer a moment or create an opportunity or push this along in some deliberate way. What I'm sensing is that this is already moving toward its own resolution, driven by their own internal process rather than by anything you need to initiate. What I'd suggest instead is just staying available. Don't fill every hour of the coming stretch with distractions that would make you hard to reach emotionally or literally. Leave some space. Let yourself be findable in whatever way is relevant to how this person tends to reach you, whether that's a message, a call, an in person moment. The opening I'm sensing needs a receptive space to land in, and the more available you are, the more likely you are to be fully present for it when it happens, rather than discovering after the fact that you missed the actual moment because you were absorbed in something else. I want to close with something about the emotional significance of this beyond the practical mechanics of how it happens. What this person is about to do, opening up after holding something back for what I sense has been a meaningful stretch of time, is an act of real courage, even if it doesn't look dramatically courageous from the outside. The vulnerability required to finally say something you've been protecting yourself from saying, to risk how it lands, to give up the safety of ambiguity in favor of clarity that might not go the way you hope. That's genuinely hard, and I think it's worth recognizing that effort, that risk, even in the middle of whatever your own reaction is. This isn't just information arriving. It's someone choosing you in a very specific sense, choosing to be vulnerable with you specifically because something about you, about this connection, made the risk feel worth taking. Finally, after all the time spent not taking it, that's significant. Hold it as significant, even if the moment itself, when it actually happens, feels smaller or more ordinary than you might have pictured in advance. Hours, that's what's coming through. And I don't have a reason to doubt it. Stay present, stay available, and when it happens, just be there. That's all this actually requires from you.